can my right honourable friend also clarify whether the government agrees with the US's statement this morning that the UN Security Council resolution is non-binding? And where are we going to, and how are we going to ensure that on both sides, the return of hostages and the ceasefire in Ramadan, that they are enacted? Because if they are not, I fear that the UN Security Council will face an existential crisis.
He asked me, Mr. Speaker, about the arms export licensing, and let me give him a very, very clear response to that. We have, Mr. Speaker, a robust arms export licensing regime.
Show Secretary of State David Lammy.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement, and I'd like to echo his support for the formation of a new Palestinian government, which must be supported internationally, alongside the need for a two-state solution with Israel and Palestine living side by side in security and peace. Yesterday, the UN Security Council finally passed Resolution 2728, calling for an immediate ceasefire, the immediate release of all hostages, and full humanitarian access in Gaza. This was incredibly welcome and overdue. It must now be a turning point. We welcome, too, that the government was able to support this motion. It represents a major shift in government policy, which previously called only for an immediate pause rather than an immediate ceasefire. Can I ask why it was not able to back Labour's motion last month? Much more importantly, what steps is the government taking to ensure the UN resolution is implemented in full, putting pressure on Hamas, who reportedly rejected the latest compromise, and Israel to reach agreement on a ceasefire now? This would not be more vital given the terrible human cost of this war. More than 30,000 Palestinians dead, Israeli hostages still in chains, nearly 6 months on from the October the 7th massacre, and with a man-made and preventable famine imminent. Aid needs to get into Gaza at scale, but it needs also to be distributed. UNRWA is unmatched in its ability to distribute aid. With just a few weeks until the new financial year, can the Minister now tell us if the UK funding to UNRWA will resume? The UN motion also said that all parties must comply with their obligations under international law. In that context, I want to raise a specific incident with the Minister. On the 18th of January, an IRC and medical aid for Palestinians compound was struck in a near-fatal airstrike by the Israeli military. The coordinates were known to Israel and formally deconflicted. A British medical team and local staff were inside. Since then, they've received 6 explanations for this shocking incident, but the truth is still unclear. Will the government support a full and independent investigation to deliver accountability and reiterate the attacks on humanitarian workers are outrageous and must not happen? The Foreign Secretary is not required to come to this House, but he is required to provide legal advice to the Business Secretary on arms exports. Exactly. The law is clear. The government cannot grant a licence if there is a clear risk that the items could be used in violation of international humanitarian law. The war in Gaza has seen numerous allegations made of serious breaches of humanitarian law by Israeli forces, and the ICC is currently conducting an investigation into alleged war crimes committed by all parties in Gaza. On Friday, I wrote to the Foreign Secretary asking him to publish the most recent legal advice he's received on this matter. So I'd like to end by asking the Minister one simple question. Has the Foreign Secretary received legal advice saying there is a clear risk that items licensed by the UK might be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law? The answer is a simple yes or no.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I first of all thank the honourable gentleman for his strong support for United Nations Security Council Resolution 2728. He asks what the government will do to ensure that it is implemented in full, and just as that resolution shows considerable success for British diplomatic work, particularly in New York, he may rest assured and the House may rest assured that we will be doing everything we can to ensure that it is indeed implemented in full. He suggests that this is a reflection of the Labour position in the House. Mr. Speaker, I hope that by and large the Labour position is very supportive of the government, but he should be quite clear that the resolution yesterday represents a tremendous success for British diplomacy. It now means that the European Union, the United Nations and the United States now take our position on the priorities. And if I may remind him, what we said very clearly was that we needed an immediate pause so that we could get aid in and the hostages out, leading to a sustainable ceasefire. I quote directly, and he will see that British position fully reflected in what was decided yesterday in New York. He asks me about UNRWA, and I can tell him that the report by the former French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna, the interim report, because of course the final report is not due until the 20th of April, the interim report is now with the Secretary-General in New York, and we hope to learn more about it today from New York. He refers to a specific strike which the House has heard about before, and I agree with him entirely that we expect a full and total explanation for what happened, a definitive explanation of that from the Israeli government. He asks me, Mr. Speaker, about the arms export licensing, and let me give him a very, very clear response to that. We have, Mr. Speaker, a robust arms export licensing regime. All exports are regularly assessed against clear criteria. We regularly review Israel's adherence to international humanitarian law, and we act in accordance with that. We advise, as he indicated, the Department for Business and Trade on the situation in country, and DBT and their Secretary of State are the decision-making authorities. But I would point out to him that UK exports are very small. They amounted to 0.02% of Israel's military imports, and we publish a comprehensive report on official statistics every quarter. Finally, Mr. Speaker, he asks me to publish the legal advice, and I would point out to him that no government does that. He will recall, I think, at the time of the Iraq War and the highly contentious position then, that the legal advice was not published. And for a party that aspires, possibly in the future, to be in government, I'm sure they will see the merit of these conventions, Mr. Speaker.
Chair of the Select Committee, Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the UN Security Council passed a resolution for a Ramadan ceasefire, in effect, a pause. Now, intrinsic to that pause was the release of hostages. So can the Deputy Foreign Secretary please update us on progress to get those hostages home to safety? Because the resolution was very clear that it should be immediate. So who is enforcing the immediate release of hostages? Can my right honourable friend also clarify whether the government agrees with the US's statement this morning that the UN Security Council resolution is non-binding? And where are we going to, and how are we going to ensure that on both sides, the return of hostages and the ceasefire Ramadan, that they are enacted? Because if they are not, I fear that the UN Security Council will face an existential crisis.
Well, my honourable friend, the chair of the Select Committee, sets out with great eloquence what the international community now require to take place as a result, Mr. Speaker, of the Resolution 2728 passed yesterday. And as I set out in my earlier remarks, we regret that this resolution has not condemned the terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October, but I want to re-emphasise that all the things that Britain has previously been calling for are now accepted and were recorded in that resolution. So we will, as my honourable friend suggests, continue to do everything we can to ensure that the resolution is implemented.
SNP spokesperson Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Minister for prior sight of his statement. And we very much welcome the UN Security Council resolution, which demands an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan. This is an important first step in achieving the permanent ceasefire that we on these benches have been calling on for several months. We also welcome the UN demands for an immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and that all parties adhere to their obligations under international law, for civilians to be protected and for the lifting of all barriers to humanitarian aid. That this motion specifically demands a ceasefire makes it legally binding, and it obliges all combatants to adhere to it. Yet already there is significant concern that Israel does not intend to comply with the demands, with the Israeli ambassador to the UN and the Foreign Minister, Israel Katz, among others, indicating that they will not adhere to the demands for a ceasefire, with Mr Katz stating that the State of Israel will not cease fire. Of course, Israel, as we know, has formed for ignoring binding resolutions of the United Nations, but rarely can it have done so in such a blatant manner and with such a complete disregard for the rules on which we all rely upon to keep us safe. So given that they have signalled their intention to ignore the demand for a ceasefire, and rather than waiting for the inevitable to happen before acting, can the Minister assure the House that if and when Israel does launch its proposed offensive on Rafah, that the work will already have been done to impose immediate sanctions, most importantly, the banning of arms sales to Israel, and that Tel Aviv will be left under no illusion as to the consequences of their action should they ignore this resolution? And could he update the House on what discussions have been had or are being planned with our partners and allies to ensure that we take decisive international action should Israel breach the terms of this resolution? And finally, could he confirm that it is the opinion of the UK Government that should Israel not adhere to this UN resolution, that it would be in violation of a binding resolution and thus stand in breach of international law?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, may I welcome his support for the government's position, which has not always been the case in these statements, and particularly the consensual language from the SNP on the ceasefire and the release of hostages and on getting aid in. I think that is very important, and it means that the authority which the Prime Minister brought from this dispatch box, and which is now the essence of this new resolution 2728, gets broad support from the House. And I think that is very welcome. For the remaining parts of what he said, I think the government wants to try and bring people together. We want to end the violence as soon as we can. We want to ensure that the hostages get out. We want to ensure that aid gets in. And we want to ensure that we can lift people's eyes to a political track once this catastrophe is over. So I think that is what the government is trying to do, and he'll forgive me for not going down the rather more divisive line that he took. And in respect of military action in Rafah, he will have heard what the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister and I have said about the importance of respecting international humanitarian law and the position of civilians caught out in the open there, and I hope he will agree with it.